quick, you're not going to have time to take notes. This information you have seen before already. Once I get to stuff that you have not seen, I will slow down. Okay? Cool. Tissues. Cells working together, doing a bunch of stuff, that's a tissue. A bunch of tissues working together, doing stuff, that's an organ. A bunch of organs working together, doing stuff, that's an organ system. A bunch of organ systems working together, doing the stuff, that makes up an organism. I'm an organism, you're an organism, that tree outside is an organism, the starfish in the ocean is also an organism, okay? 4 basic types of tissues: epithelial, connective, muscle, nervous. Epithelial tissue is what will cover and protect your body. Connective tissue will support. Muscle will help you move. Nervous tissue, all of the control of it. Epithelial tissue covers the surface or lines the body cavity, mostly functions in protection, secretion, absorption, diffusion, filtration, and sensory reception. The structure of the tissue lends to its function. Okay? Special characteristics of epithelial cell. You'll see a bunch of cells, not a lot of extracellular matrix. Okay? So lots of cells, not a lot of stuff in between them. Those cells are joined by these specific junctions, tight junctions, desmosomes, all kinds of stuff. We'll talk about that in lecture today. Another special characteristics, these cells have polarity. There is a top and a bottom. The bottom is the basal surface. The top is the apical surface. Apical surface will usually open up to air. Basal surface will usually open up down to connective tissue, that kind of stuff. Epithelial tissue is supported by connective tissue. It is avascular and innervated, and it regenerates like crazy. Epithelial tissue is one of the few tissues in your body that will just regenerate like nobody's business. Nervous tissue basically does not regenerate. Muscle tissue takes a lot of time and energy to regenerate. Connective tissue does when it can. These are those junctions that I was talking about, and they just form to kind of help send information to and from cells. We classify epithelial tissue by a couple of things. First is by the number of layers in their cells. So simple means that it has only one layer that is attached directly to that basement membrane. So it'll look something like this. Whereas stratified has multiple layers, at least 2, that are hanging out on that basement membrane. Well, one layer is attached to the basement membrane, but then there's a bunch of layers on top of it. So it looks kind of like that. It's getting uglier and uglier as I go up, but that's the gist of that. The other way that we classify epithelial tissue is by their shape. Squamous cells are flat. Those are wider than they are tall. Cuboidal cells are pretty cubed, and columnar cells are as tall as they are wide. Are taller than they are wide, sorry. Like a column. Okay. That's what it looks like. Better drawings of the things that I have just drawn. These are all of the layers in a stratified. That's that one single layer attached to the basement membrane in the simple. Squamous being flat, cuboidal having cubes, columnar being column shaped. A graph that says all of the things that I just said. Simple squamous epithelium functions mostly in passive diffusion and filtration. You're going to find it in the lungs, in the alveoli of the kidney, alveoli of the lungs specifically. You're going to find them in the kidney glomeruli, and probably a few other places that you would see some of that filtration, diffusion kind of energy. Okay. Lining of the heart, lining of the ventral body cavity, in the serosae. If you remember, the serosae are the kind of balloon layers around organs. There's a visceral serosa and a parietal serosa. You've seen this information as well. This was in Lab 1, Intro to Anatomy. Okay. That's that simple squamous epithelium. Looks like some snakes and worms and stuff like that. This would be the apical surface, and then the basal surface is right down in here. With these ones, it's a little bit more difficult to find apical and basal because it is just one single line, but look for the basement membrane and you'll find it. You look for open air, assume the open air spot is the apical membrane. Next, we have simple cuboidal. Secretion, absorption, you guys can go through these when you have time. Keratin and non-keratinized. Keratin is a protein. It is what waterproofs your body. This is what makes your nails hard. It's what helps your hair be healthy and all that stuff. Keratinized epithelial is generally used for protection, while non-keratinized lines mucous membranes. Okay. Stratified cuboidal, you don't see this super often, but it does do a little bit of protection. Stratified columnar, even more rare. And then that transitional epithelium, you'll see this one around your urinary bladder. Because it needs to be able to stretch and compress once it is no longer filled with urine. All right, so connective tissue. Connective tissue is some of the most diverse and abundant tissue that we have in our bodies. There's all kinds of different types of connective tissue. We kind of talked about these a little bit when I made this graph kind of the first time around. But there's 4 main classes of connective tissue. We have connective tissue proper, and connective tissue proper is broken into 2 categories: loose connective tissue and dense connective tissue. And then each of these has 3 subdivisions within it. Next is cartilage. There's 3 different types of cartilage that we'll talk about. Bones exist as a connective tissue, and blood is the last of the connective tissues. Okay. I said it once, I will say it again, structure equals function. So the structure of these different types of connective tissues will lend to its varying and diverse functions, such as forming the basis of the skeleton. That one's going to be mostly bone. Storing and carrying nutrients. All of them do a good bit of that. Surrounding blood vessels and nerves, and leading the fight against infection. That infection one's mostly in the blood. You know what? That's not going to work for me. Okay. Developing fetus. Okay. So there are lots of different types of connective tissues, and they'll have different types of cells and different amounts of extracellular matrix here and there, but they do all have the same structural elements. There are 4 or 5 things that stay the same within all connective tissues. Okay. So first is the cells. All connective tissues will have cells of some type. Okay. The primary cell type in the connective tissue is what makes that extracellular matrix. Okay. So some of those primary cell types, we have fibroblasts, we have chondroblasts, and we have osteoblasts. You'll note that all of these words have the root blast at the end. That probably tells you that blast means something important. It means to build. Blast cells build. Okay. Later on, you'll see osteoclasts around, C-L-A-S-T. Osteoclasts collapse things or break things down. Okay. So fibroblasts are usually going to be your primary cell type in any of the connective tissue propers. So that's any of the loose connective tissue, the dense connective tissues. Chondroblasts will make the matrix in cartilage. That root chondro means cartilage. Okay. And then osteoblasts will secrete the matrix in bone, and that root osteo means bone. Fibro means fiber. Chondro means cartilage. Okay. So like I said, except for blood cells, the red blood cells do not produce their own matrix. the plasma and all of the fluid that is your blood is the matrix that the red blood cells are hanging out in. Okay. You will find other types of cells in connective tissue, but the primary cell type is going to be the one that makes that extracellular matrix. Okay. Areolar connective tissue will have fat cells, white blood cells, some mast cells, and most of these are immunity stuff. Mast cells are actually histamine, but we'll get there later. Okay? All connective tissues will have fibers. Okay? That extracellular matrix, since it is made up of fibers and ground substance, and the cells make the extracellular matrix, you're obviously going to always have fibers. Okay? Those fibers have different functions, and based on their structures, they have different roles. So collagen fibers are going to be your strongest, and they resist tension in any direction. A collagen fiber, you can think of that as like something like this. It pulls. You can pull it, it's not going to rip, right? A reticular fibers, you can kind of think of these as nets. A reticular fiber, you can pull a reticular fiber kind of in any direction. It resists tension in multiple directions. So I can pull this way, I can pull it this way, I can punch it, I can do all kinds of stuff, and it's not exactly going to rip. So kind of think of reticular fiber as like a net, okay? And then elastic fibers contain the protein elastin, and it does exactly what it sounds like. It is that coily, stretchy stuff that makes all of your sweatpants be awesome and makes anything that doesn't have elastic horrible. And then the ground substance. Same thing, the cells make that extracellular matrix. That extracellular matrix is made up of fibers and ground substance. So of course you are going to see ground substance in every connective tissue. Okay? It is a gel-like kind of guy that has some proteoglycans and some glycosaminoglycans. That just means sugar, nitrogen, sugars. This one is just protein, sugar. Okay? So we have nitrogen sugars, nitrogen sugar, and we have protein sugar. Just different types of, for lack of a better word, nutrients for either the cells or the surrounding tissues. Okay? These cushion and protect your body. They hold a lot of fluid. And like I said, blood is the exception. Plasma, the extra little kind of, when you're separating blood, you have that layer, then you have your buffy layer. You can't see that buffy layer. Let's say that's right there. And then you have your plasma layer. That plasma is not made by those red blood cells. That is just different blood particles, okay? Blood is the exception to pretty much all of these rules. Remember how I said in biology, there's the always with the asterisk? The blood is just one of those asterisks, okay? This is a table comparing several of the connective tissues. It is a good idea to look at this. Just to get kind of an idea of what some of the primary cells might be, what kind of subclasses you may or may not see in that specific tissue type. Okay? All of the above. Okay, so connective tissue proper. Remember back at my little chart, we had connective tissue proper, and I said that connective tissue proper breaks down into two bits, loose and dense. Loose connective tissue has 3 subclasses. Those are areolar connective tissue, adipose, and reticular. In that reticular connective tissue, what type of fibers do you think you might see? Remember, biologists are not creative. Say the first thing that pops into your head. What type of fiber might you see in that reticular connective tissue? Reticular fibers. Yeah, you're going to see hella reticular fibers. Biologists aren't creative. They will go with the thing that is easiest 99% of the time. Okay? And in that, in the dense connective tissue, in the elastic subclass, what kind of fibers do you think you'll see most there? Elastic fibers. Exactly. Biologists are not creative. They're going to do the thing that is easiest, makes the most sense, is the most intuitive, until they don't, but that's a different conversation. Okay? Don't worry about the embryonic mesenchyme. I'm not going to test you on it. This is what it looks like just for your reference. Okay, so we use areolar connective tissue as our model for all of the other connective tissues because it has all of the structural components that we're looking for. It has the cells, it has the fibers, it has the ground substance, and then we can kind of just extrapolate that information for all of the other tissue types based on what their primary cell type is. Okay? So you can see there's all kinds of cells. This is an adipose cell. This is a mast cell. This is a white blood cell. This big old guy here is a fibroblast. And this is the guy that's making all of that extracellular matrix. There's another one over here. Well, a lymphocyte over there. And then all of these fibers that are hanging out in there. Okay. Since fibroblasts do make all 3 types of fibers, generally, you will see all 3 types of fibers in any given sample that has a fibroblast as its primary cell. There will just be an abundance of a specific type of fiber, like in those reticular fibers, or in the reticular connective tissue. Okay? So, areolar connective tissue, that one will be underlying most of your epithelial cells. So anywhere that you have epithelial tissue, surface of your skin, blood vessels, anything like that, there's probably going to be some areolar connective tissue underneath it. Okay? Major function is going to be to support the other tissues, hold body fluids, store nutrients as fats, and defend against infection. Okay? So areolar connective tissue, you'll find it pretty much everywhere. Being a supportive friend. Okay? Those fibers that I have been prattling on and on about, they will show up in that extracellular matrix. Bless you. Collagen fibers, they resist tension in any direction. Reticular fibers, they are our net. And elastic fibers are our best friends. And all 3 of these fibers are made by those fibroblasts, right? And that makes sense. Fibro means fiber, blast is to build. These cells build fibers, right? Make sense? Cool. So, areolar has all 3 fiber types. You will need to know that. That's going to pop up. I'm going to tell you right now, that's going to pop up. Areolar connective tissue has all 3 fiber types. You'll also see some fibroblasts, macrophages, mast cells, white blood cells. If I tell you that there are all three types of fibers in a sample, and I tell you nothing else about it, everywhere. Everywhere. So much so everywhere that everywhere is not a specific enough answer. Okay? So I'm going to need things like under the skin, around the organs, something like that. Okay? So if you say everywhere, I will be mad. I won't be mad. I'll be sad and a little disappointed. Okay? And you don't want to disappoint me, right? No, it's okay. So under the skin is probably going to be your best bet for that answer. All right? Sick. That's that areolar connective tissue. All of these little purple dots that you see in here, those are fibroblast nuclei. Okay? The elastic fibers, these are these little kind of squiggly looking guys. The collagen fibers are the thick pink guys, and the reticular fibers are in there as well. They are the much thinner pink guys, kind of going every which way. Okay? They are all there. Tissue fluid, the interstitial fluid, that's just kind of all the excess fluid that's in your body. The connective tissue, the areolar connective tissue does tend to hold that liquid. Okay? And that tissue fluid is pretty much just stuff that gets leaked from your blood vessels and enters into your body. It happens. And then the ground substance, it is made of those sugar and protein molecules that is secreted by those fibroblasts. Okay? It's what allows for the cushiony part of the areolar connective tissue to do its job. Cool? That's where we fight infections. Your white blood cells, your mast cells, your plasma cells, your macrophages, they tend to gather in the connective tissue and then go to where they are needed from there. Okay? Adipose tissue. Adipose is the fancy science word for fat. Okay? Adipose tissue will have some very closely packed adipocytes. Those are fat cells. Adipo means fat. Cyte means cell. Literally fat cells. And their nucleus are pushed to one side by that fat droplet. Okay? These adipose tissues are highly vascularized, so they do get a lot of blood coming to and from them. Adipose tissue functions as a reserve food source, insulates against heat, and does quite a bit of protecting and supporting your organs. Okay? You're going to find it anywhere you find fat, honestly. Ooh, what happened? Stop this. That was weird. Okay. So under the skin, around your kidneys. So when you get punched in the kidney, you don't like break your kidney, right? Behind your eyeballs, within your abdomen, in the breasts, and in the hypodermis. That's the layer underneath the epidermis and underneath the dermis. Okay. So basically, anywhere that you would find fat is where you will find these adipose tissues. It's pretty accurate as to what it looks like. This is that big old fat cell, the fat droplet, and then the nucleus pushed all the way up into the corner here. Okay. Super, super, super easy to differentiate fat cells from pretty much anything else. They're the only ones that really look like this. We do have brown adipose tissue. It is mostly in babies, but we do find it in adults as well. It produces quite a bit of heat and is highly vascularized as well. It also contains a lot of mitochondria. Why might it contain that much mitochondria? Because it does a lot of energy production from those reserved food fuel. Reserved food. Okay. In adults, you'll find it kind of between your scapula, on the sides of your neck, and on the front of the abdominal wall. Okay. Reticular connective tissue. Again, you will see mostly reticular fibers. Because I see reticular fibers, what kind of cell am I going to see in this tissue type? What was that? Because I see reticular fibers in this tissue, what kind of cell am I going to see in this tissue? Where did you go? Reticular tissues. It looks kind of crazy, but that is the net. Okay. So those reticular fibers hanging out in here, being cool, doing what they do. Let's make that yellow so you can actually see it. All of these guys here are reticular fibers. And they form kind of a network to support some of these other organs. Okay. So that was loose connective tissue. Remember, in our connective tissue proper, we have loose, we have dense. We've gone through all three of the loose: areolar, adipose, and reticular. Now we're getting into the dense connective tissue. Okay. There are three types of dense connective tissue: irregular, regular, and elastic. Okay. Dense connective tissue will resist more pulling forces. Okay. So they will have a lot more collagen. They have the ability to resist that tension force, right? And because of that, they're going to see a lot of collagen. I see a lot of collagen fibers in this sample. What kind of cell am I going to find in this sample? Fibroblasts. You see a fiber, you think fibroblasts. Okay? Collagen is a fiber. You see a fiber, you think fibroblast. Okay? Dense, irregular connective tissue will have collagen fibers that are thick, but they are helter-skelter, right? In regular, they were pretty organized. In irregular, they will be thick and they'll be kind of all over the place. Okay? You will have some elastic fibers, occasional elastic fiber here being curly and cutie over here. And you will have what kind of cell? Fibroblasts. Fibroblasts. You see fibers, you think fibroblast. Okay? Dense irregular does do quite a bit of tension withstanding, but it's mostly there for structural strength. Okay? You're going to see this mostly in the dermis of the skin, in some of the fibrous joint capsules, and some of the capsules surrounding the kidneys, your bones, and your lymph nodes. Okay? I could draw a bone like that. There's a little layer of connective tissue on top of your bones to keep them all kind of where they need to be. Okay? This is that dense irregular. You see our collagen fibers. They are all kind of willy-nilly, helter-skelter, just doing whatever the heck they want, right? But they are strong. They resist tension. Okay? Because I see these fibers, what kind of cell am I going to find? Everybody now. Fibroblasts. Great. So you're not going to get that wrong. If any of you say anything other than fibroblast, I get to punch you, right? I'm not going to punch you. I'm not going to punch anybody. Please, for the recording, I'm not punching anybody. Thank you. Dense, regular connective tissue. Those collagen fibers are going to be parallel to the direction of the pull, okay? So if I am pulling this way, my fibers are also going to run this way. If I'm pulling this way, my fibers will run this way, okay? Does that make sense? I see fibers, so I know that there are fibroblasts. Thank you. You'll see a few elastic fibers here and there, but not a ton, okay? It's mostly going to be collagen fibers in those dense, regular connective tissues. They have great tensile strength, but they are not very well vascularized. So when they break, it takes a while to heal, okay? Bad blood. Okay? These dense, regular connective tissues, they are things that attach muscle to bone. That is also called a tendon. And things that attach bones to other bones are called ligaments. Yeah, tendons and ligaments. That's why when you pull a muscle, right, it takes a while to heal, no matter how old you are. It takes a little while for that pulled muscle to heal. Okay, it's because those connective tissues are not very well vascularized. Okay, aponeuroses is just a tendon, but in like sheath form. You have an aponeurosis on like the top of your head. The fronto-occipital aponeuroses. It's just a large sheet of tissue that it's what lets you kind of move your skull around, right? Or move the top of your head. Or, you know what I'm talking about here. Move your skull. You know what I'm talking about? Move your head. You're with me. Great. Fascia around muscles, that's just a little kind of tension around your muscles. Your muscles kind of go like this. And there's sheets and sheets and sheets and sheets that will eventually form onto the bone. This is the tendon. And the fascia around that muscle is made from, or the tendon is made from the fascia around that muscle. Okay. And this will come up again when we get to muscles. Okay. Dense regular. That's what it looks like. Real cool, real chill and easy. Everything looks like it's a nice low wave, connected, looks very regular, right? Dense regular versus dense irregular, which was helter-skelter, kind of crazy, okay? Elastic, you're gonna see mostly elastic fibers in that elastic connective tissue. If I'm seeing elastic fibers, what kind of cell am I going to see? Fibroblasts. You see a fiber, you think fibroblasts, okay? Function is to recoil after stretching. That's what makes your sweatpants awesome. And that's why your ear didn't fall off when you were a kid, when your mom grabbed it when you were being bad, okay? That ear went back to being its regular shape. No matter what you do to it, you pull it, you push it, you twist it around in 15 different directions, it's going to go right back where it's supposed to go. Unless you did wrestling. Then you might get something called cauliflower ear, and that's due to lots of trauma to the ear. You broke a bunch of blood vessels and stuff, and it just swelled all up, and now you got scar tissue. But that's a different thing, okay? You're going to see elastic connective tissue in the walls of your arteries, specifically in your aorta. That needs to be able to stretch and recoil around your bronchial tubes and around some of your ligaments. Elastic connective tissue looks a lot like dense regular, but it has all of these elastic fibers. And those elastic fibers kind of look like ramen. Like if you were to draw with a Sharpie on like a thing of ramen and then paste it onto a paper, that's what those elastic fibers would look like. So, see something that is ramen-like, think elastic fibers. Does that make sense? Is that like super crazy out of pocket? Great, cool. So, looks like ramen, probably elastic. Okay, cool. So now we've done all of connective tissue proper. Connective tissue proper. And that has its loose and dense and all three of its variations. Now we are getting into cartilage. Okay, cartilage, like the connective tissue proper, all cartilages will have some similar components, so similar structural components. Okay, they are pretty firm, pretty flexible. The cell type in these guys is the chondrocyte. Chondrocyte. Chondro means cartilage. Cyte means cell. Okay? Cartilage cells. Chondroblasts are immature cartilage cells. So you start as a chondroblast. You will eventually, after you secrete a bunch of matrix and do a bunch of stuff, become a chondrocyte. Same thing with bone. Start as an osteoblast, build your matrix, be mature, you become an osteocyte. Okay? Start as a blast, end as a cyte. There are three types of cartilage: hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibrocartilage. Hyaline cartilage is your most supportive. Okay. They're all pretty supportive, but hyaline is going to be your most common cartilage that you see. Okay. It's going to support, it is going to reinforce, and it is going to resist some types of compressive stress. Okay. Elastic cartilage, its main job is to maintain structure. Okay. Lots of flexibility. Super, super flexy. Okay. And then fibrocartilage is going to be your stiffest type of cartilage. So it is going to be the least flexible, but it will be the most absorptive. I think that's the word. Absorbative. Sure, yeah. Most absorbability. Bro. I know that absorbability isn't a word. Just roll with me here, okay? And then each of these cartilages will have specialized functions because of their structure. Okay? Hyaline cartilages, you will see these collagen fibers. Not really. They are basically imperceptible. They're really, really hard to see. They're very glassy looking. Okay? The chondroblasts will make that matrix. And then eventually those chondroblasts will mature into chondrocytes. And those chondrocytes will sit in what we call a lacunae. A lacunae is like lacunae means little lake. Okay, so it sits in there. As it is secreting its matrix, the matrix kind of grows around it, and then it gets stuck in there. Once it's stuck, it is now a chondrocyte. Like I said, super supportive, does a lot of reinforcement, pretty resilient as a cushion, and resists repetitive stress. So you're going to see this in places like your costal cartilages. So you may or may not know that your ribs, the last like 4 of them, are actually not connected to your sternum at all. They're connected by that hyaline cartilage. The hyaline cartilage is what connects your ribs to your sternum so that you have a whole rib cage. Okay? You'll see it a lot in the fetal skeleton. It'll definitely be on the ends of long bones. Like I said, the costal cartilages are the ribs, and in the cartilage of your nose, your trachea, and your larynx. Most of your nose is cartilage. Your nasal bone ends like up here, and the rest of it is just straight cartilage. You can feel it. You can feel where the bone stops and where it starts becoming like kind of squishy. That's cartilage. Okay. So you can see the chondrocyte sitting right there in its little lacunae. It has built matrix up around it until it got stuck. Now that it's stuck, it has fully matured. It is a chondrocyte. Okay. Elastic cartilage, pretty similar to hyaline cartilage. It will have more elastic fibers in its matrix. Okay. Because we are in cartilage, the primary cell type is not going to be a fibroblast. The main thing for cartilage should be chondrocytes. Okay? Now that we are in cartilage, when you see fibers, I don't want you to automatically think fibrocyte. Because we are in cartilage, you need to be thinking chondrocyte. You will still see some fibroblasts, but they are not the primary cell type. Because there are fibers there, you know that there are fibroblasts in solution, but they are not the main cell type, not in cartilage. Your primary cell type in cartilage is going to be a chondrocyte. Okay? Right, those elastic cartilages, super flexible, great at maintaining structure, support the external ear and the epiglottis. The epiglottis is that little flap that prevents food from going into your trachea and food from going into your trachea and going to your esophagus where it's supposed to go. Epiglottis doesn't always do its job, but it tries. I already said that. Supports the inner ear. Okay. So you can see all of these elastic fibers. Looks kind of like ramen, but with big old chondrocytes hanging out in there. Okay. You see the chondrocyte, you see the lacuna that it is sitting in. The rest is elastic fibers, matrix, all of that kind of stuff. Okay. And then fibrocartilage. Fibrocartilage, I want you to think 2 things when you think fibrocartilage. I want you to think fibers. I want you to think chondrocytes. So what 2 types of cells might you see in this fibrocartilage? Be brave. A fibroblast and a chondrocyte. Yeah, you're going to see some fibroblasts because those fibroblasts are going to make the fiber, right? And the chondrocytes are what make cartilage. Fibers and cartilage. Fibrocartilage. Put the words together, right? So, matrix is pretty similar to hyaline cartilage. It's just not as firm, but it does have these very thick collagen fibers, okay? Collagen fibers resist tension. Resist. What? Resist tension. Okay? So this fibrocartilage is really good at absorbing compressive shock, okay? You're going to find this type of cartilage in between your vertebrae, right? In your intervertebral discs, in the discs of your knee joint, and in your pubic symphysis, okay? All of these places take quite a bit of compressive force. Every time you jump, you are putting an insane amount of pressure on your knees, on your spine, and your fibrocartilage in between all of your intervertebral discs, the one that's around your knees, keeps all of that stuff from compressing on itself, okay? So that fibrocartilage is super, super important in maintaining any type of compressive action. All of the walking that you do in a day, all of the jumping and, I don't know, random things that you do, all happen because that fibrocartilage allows for that compressive force to be absorbed, okay? That's what it looks like. Kind of looks like dense, irregular connective tissue, but with some chondrocytes thrown in there, okay? So it has those collagen fibers, kind of all random, helter-skelter, doing what it is that they do, but you do still definitely see those chondrocytes, the lacunae in the chondrocytes within their lacunae. Okay? Okay. I'm tired of talking, so I'm going to take a break. Bro, it didn't record all of that. I said it though. Osteoblasts secrete collagen. They get stuck, they form an osteocyte, and that osteocyte has blood vessels pretty much running through it in what we call a Calvarian channel. Bone's function is to support and protect your organ, provide as levers and attachment sites for your muscles, store calcium, other minerals, store blood, and form red blood cells. Red and some white blood cells, but mostly red blood cells, okay? Your bone marrow is where that blood cell formation begins, okay? Where are you going to find bone tissue? In your bones. This is what bone tissue kind of looks like, all right? So you can see that osteocyte hanging out in there. It's there, promise. And there are these central canals. That central canal is going to be where that blood vessel is kind of running through the bone tissue. Okay? The lamellae is just different rings of that matrix, because every time the matrix grows out a little more, it solidifies, it grows out a little more, solidifies, grows out a little more. Your bones grow outwards, not really up. I mean, they do grow up, but it's mostly the outwards that they grow. Okay? And that's it for bones. Okay? Blood, the last piece of connective tissue, is a relatively atypical type of connective tissue. The red blood cells do not secrete the matrix in any way, shape, or form. It develops straight from the mesenchyme, so straight from the early processes in development. You start with blood. Like, you have blood basically from the get-go, okay? And it has cells surrounded by a non-living matrix. The non-living matrix is also the plasma. Same thing. But your red blood cells do not make the plasma. Plasma is just a derivative of blood. It is a filtered part of blood. Okay. Blood is just red and white blood cells in a fluid matrix. You're going to find it in your blood vessels, and its job is to transport respiratory gases, so CO2 and O2, nutrients, all of the sugars that you eat, H12O6, and any of the wastes, either nitrogenous, alcohol-based, etc. Okay? And that's blood. Blood looks like blood. We got these teeny tiny little red blood cells. They're actually not that super small, but have some red blood cells in there. White blood cells, there are 5 different types of white blood cells. I'll usually abbreviate white blood cells with WBC because I'm not writing out all of those words, and red blood cells with RBC. Okay? 5 different types of white blood cells. This specific example is showing you a lymphocyte and a neutrophil. Okay? Don't get stressed out by this image, but it is helpful to look at. Good little graph, shows you all of the connective tissues, what they look like, where you might find them. Okay, so that's it for connective tissue. Connective tissue proper, loose and dense, areolar, adipose, reticular, regular, irregular, elastic, cartilage, hyaline, elastic, fibrocartilage, bone is bone, blood is blood. Now we're moving into the third tissue type. Third tissue type is muscle tissue. Okay? Muscle tissue is a composite tissue, meaning that it has some connective tissue and some muscle tissue. It's a mixture of both. Okay? Muscle cells are also called muscle fibers. They are also called myocytes. They are also called a whole bunch of other stuff, but they are all muscle cells. This root myo means muscle. Okay? Those myocytes contain myofilaments, and those myofilaments are made up of actin and myosin. And these are just 2 proteins that we will talk about a little bit further when we get to muscles. So don't worry about them too much right now. Just know that your muscle fibers will contain myofilaments. Okay? There are 3 types of muscle tissue. The first is skeletal muscle. That is the one that you think of most. That is the one that when you go to the gym, that is what you are working out. I mean, also your cardiac muscle, but that's a different conversation. Okay, but your skeletal muscle, that's what you think of when you're like bodybuilders, anything like that. Going to the gym to get swole, you're working your skeletal muscles. Okay, cardiac muscle is your heart muscle. You will only find cardiac muscle tissue in your heart. You should not have cardiac muscle tissue anywhere else. Okay? Smooth muscle tissue is going to be in your digestive system. It is going to be anywhere that requires some like movement, peristalsis kind of actions. Okay? There are some distinct differences between these 3 muscle types. Skeletal muscle tissue is going to have these very long cylindrical cells, look kind of like this, right? And these cells will have what we call striations. Okay? They will also have multiple nuclei. Okay? Very long cylindrical cells, multinucleated, many nucleuses, and these very obvious striations. These striations are they're like stripes, stripies. Okay? This type of tissue will have an abundance of mitochondria. Why? Because they're using a lot of energy. They need to be able to make a lot of energy. Okay? Skeletal muscle does all of your voluntary movement, so the ability to pick up a pencil and start writing, the ability to walk around this campus, the ability to pick up your coffee and drink it, all of that stuff is all skeletal muscle. Anytime you go to the gym and you're lifting your 50-pound weights and getting so super swole for the summer, you are working your skeletal muscle. Okay? Manipulation of your environment. I can move my coffee. I can move this thing. I can move this if I want to. I can throw this pen across the room. All of this stuff that allows for voluntary movement, manipulation of my environment. Your facial expressions. You have so many muscles in your face. Don't you worry. You're going to learn them. All of your smiling and frowning and looking so bored that you could kill me. That is all facial muscles. Okay? You're going to find skeletal muscle anywhere that you would think to find a skeletal muscle. It's going to cover your entire body. I'm going to tell you everywhere. They're going to be attached directly to your bones. I think the only place it doesn't have muscles is your ear. But even then, there's muscles around your ears. But I don't know. Can y'all flex your ears? Because I don't think I can. Anyways, little aside. Got a little distracted. This is what they look like. They're striated. See these stripes? That's what I'm talking about, striation. And they have multiple nuclei. Okay? Cardiac muscle is also going to be striated. Okay? But it will be generally one nucleus. So not really as big. Definitely a lot more branching. This kind of energy. They just kind of do what they do. And they have what we call intercalated discs. And these intercalated discs allow for communication from one cell to the other. Okay? Your heart cells have to function as a unit. Your heart cells, you can't have one heart cell going, okay, I'm going to contract now, and everyone else can contract like 10 milliseconds after me because I said so. That's not how it works. Cardiac muscle needs to contract at the same time as we're all going together so that you get even beats of blood moving, which is what your heart does. Okay? And it is striated. Okay? It does what the heart does. Move blood into your body. You're only going to find it in the heart. You should not find cardiac tissue anywhere else. If you do, go to a doctor, please. Thanks. Okay. That's what it looks like. Pretty similar to that skeletal muscle, but the striations a little bit less obvious here. And you do have these intercalated discs. These little bands kind of in between cell to cell. Okay. Last type of muscle, smooth muscle. Pretty spindle shaped with one single nuclei. They're pretty close so that they form these sheets. And the thing that makes them special is that they have no striations. They are smooth. They do not have that kind of willy guy to them. Okay? Smooth muscle is going to move substances along internal passageways. So whenever you eat food and that food is kind of running through your intestines, it is moving in this peristaltic wave motion. And that peristaltic wave motion is powered by this smooth muscle tissue. Okay? So you're going to find this mostly in hollow organs, your large intestine, your small intestine, your esophagus, anything like that. Okay? That's what it looks like. No striations, nucleus here and there, but nothing too crazy. Okay. And that's it for muscles, just those three tissues. And then nervous tissue, the fourth and final tissue. Main components are going to be your brain, your spinal cord, and any of your peripheral nerves. So there's a ton of those. There are two main types of cells in nervous tissue. The neurons, those are going to be the main guy. They're going to be the main character. They generate and conduct all of these nerve impulses that tell everything else what to do. So your neurons are going to be your main character. And then the neuroglia are going to be your supporting cells. There's a bunch of different types of neuroglia. I think there's like 7. Don't quote me on that. But each type of neuroglia does a slightly different function. For now, all you really need to worry about is neurons, that they exist and being able to see what they look like. Function of the nervous tissue is to transmit those electrical signals from sensory receptors to effector cells. There's a whole pathway, sensory reception to integration to effector. But we'll talk about that in Unit 3. And you're only really going to find nervous tissue in the brain, spinal cord, and the nerves. But you will find nerves all over the body, everywhere. So, everywhere. Okay? That's what it looks like. This is the cell body of the neuron. All of these kind of hair-like projections, these are called dendrites. And then this long kind of guy, it's kind of starting to break off and you can't really see it anymore. But this long guy is called the axon. Okay? And that's it for nervous tissue. Just that one little guy. Okay? So that's it. We're done. That's it for chapter 4.